Welcome back. So let's examine our electioneering system. Is it a legacy one that can be handed over to the coming generation? But we'll begin by, first of all, examining the election, the presidential polls in Uganda. And joining us on the program this morning is the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, Mr. Samson Itodo, who joins us from our Abuja studio. Good morning, Mr. Itodo. Welcome to the Morning Brief.
A very good morning to you all and Happy New Year.
Let's try to understand what is happening in Uganda. First of all, the opposition candidate is alleging massive fraud and looting, but there's also a challenge of internet shutdown, and the government in Uganda is taking his position with a pinch rather than a pack of salt. So how do we process or understand what exactly is going on in Uganda?
Well, when you look at a country like Uganda, you compare it to Nigeria, you see a country that is worse than Nigeria. Even though, yes, there's some similarities, but what's happened in Uganda prior to yesterday cannot be called an election. It was basically, a travesty of electoral democracy. A situation where other actors are intimidated, a situation where, like you mentioned, the internet shut down, arrest of civil society leaders and election observers. You cannot call that an election because all the indicators, all the benchmarks for measuring the integrity of the election were completely absent in the election. And it's just really sad and really unfortunate. But we're not surprised because this has always been, the regime's approach towards protecting and holding on to power for over 35 years. So we cannot call what happened in Uganda an election. It's just a mockery, of the whole concept of electoral democracy. And it's really a dark, very dark season and period for all lovers of democracy because the people were denied of the opportunity, to elect a leader of their choice. You look at cases of ballot box stuffing, there were disruptions. You clearly see how, every step of the way, Museveni's regime was closing the political space and making it really hostile. And so it's just, we can't say it's an election, in my respectful opinion.
And so Jeffrey called it earlier a coronation, but we see the pattern across Africa. We've seen it in Cameroon. We can also mention a number of other countries where we have the octogenarians who are holding that space tightly. In this particular regard now, where is the African Union and, of course, all the other regional bodies in demanding some form of accountability in the electioneering system, such that, the young people can be allowed, there'll be some form of inclusion in the political space?
Well, we are waiting what's the AU's preliminary assessment of the elections. As you're aware, former President Jonathan is leading the AU election observation deployment in Uganda. When you look at these institutions, quite frankly, these are political institutions. The apex decision-making body of these institutions are the heads of states. And it's just a committee of presidents. And you ask yourself the bigger question, why is it that these institutions are unable to hold these member states to account? In certain instances, even when the AU publishes his own statement, like he has done in some elections and has condemned the elections. For instance, the AU took a very strong stand, in a country like Tanzania. So it won't be the first time, and we cannot say the AU does not hold these member states to account. But in the realm of international politics, in this era where multilateralism and diplomacy, is being undermined globally, you see dictators and authoritarians are exploiting the gap and really advancing their agenda. So you say, do they really care about these institutions? So in my view, I think what the AU needs to do, and I don't want to be preemptive, we'll wait to see what the President Jonathan-led mission will say, but quite frankly, they cannot say that this election meets the integrity test, because the entire environment where this election is situated was closed, was toxic and repressive, making it difficult, whether for opposition actors or for the voters, you know, to cast their votes in a free, fair and transparent environment.
It's very, almost literally, to say it mildly, it's laughable what plays out in Uganda and maybe neighboring Cameroon. I don't even know which is worse. We can go to places like, I think, Equatorial Guinea and other places where you don't even understand what these elections are. These elderly men, I call them democratic monarchs, who run the affairs of Africa by whatever guise and name they call it. So it's literally a coronation. It's not, those are not elections. There is no better way to put it. You put it accurately. Museveni and the rest of them want to perpetuate themselves. That's why, for some of us, conversations around AU and ECOWAS looks like we should just scrap all of that, because we don't know what the conversations they are having. And when we create these loopholes for the big boys in the West to come and, you know, take advantage, and we start screaming while we're the ones that cause the problems for ourselves. But let's come home. At least we can say our own is better than Uganda. I'm very proud to say that. Even though it's not perfect. But we are looking at 2026, ahead of 2027 in Nigeria. So many things will be happening this year. Political parties' primaries, political parties' campaigns, 2 off-cycle elections ahead of the big one. We don't know what's going to happen. You may give us an insight, because there's a conversation around whether we can be able to modify and amend the Electoral Act to the point where we can have post-election litigation to be concluded before inauguration. That may affect the dates and all of that. But give us an overview as an insider of what we're looking at in 2026. Let's look at it broadly, and then we dig deep in specifics.
Well, as you know, let's begin with the electoral law. It is disappointing that the National Assembly has missed its deadline or timeline that it set for itself to conclude the reform process. Give it to the House of Reps. Before the end of last year, the House of Reps passed its electoral bill. But the Senate have been foot-dragging, and they are the ones who are delaying the conclusion of this process. And when they resume on the 27th, we hope that the Senator Akpabio-led Senate will consider the Electoral Act, the electoral bill, pass it in time so that the president can assent to the bill. Because by the provisions of the current law, INEC is required to issue the timetable of elections come February 20th, and that is few weeks from now. So it is important that the Senate prioritizes the electoral bill and pass it in good time so that this process can be concluded, to provide some level of legal certainty as to the framework that will govern the 2027 elections. The second point is that when you look at this year, there are 3 big elections. On February 21st, you would have the FCT area council elections, you'd have the Ekiti elections, and the Osun elections. Amongst these 3 elections, it's my respectful view that the most contentious perhaps will be the FCT elections and the Osun elections. These elections will test INEC's resolve in upholding its independence as well as the credibility of the electoral process. Now, when INEC issues the timetable next month, it ushers in the activities for the 2027 elections, beginning with the conduct of the primaries. Now, the political parties who will be fielding candidates will commence their congresses, will commence their convention, because they'll have a period of about 60 to 70 something days to nominate their candidates. That entire process, has to be transparent, and it will require a lot of oversight from INEC. But before that, INEC needs to conclude the registration of new political parties, or in cases where mergers are supposed to be taking place, all of those processes need to be concluded. We have voter registration going on. Those processes also will be happening. But, Geoffrey and colleagues, this is the year that we will be asking fundamental questions about three things. The first is, will citizens trust the democratic institutions responsible for elections to the extent that they will be voting at the next elections? The second is a state of security. Because one of the things citizens have highlighted is that security is a major concern. And to what extent are security agencies going to uphold patriotism and professionalism and non-alignment in managing the electoral process? The cases where opposition actors are intimidated, or opposition political parties are not given the free space, to participate in the process, creates a problem. And lastly, is the fact that the way our political actors are conducting their activities, it's really troubling, because what they are simply telling Nigerians is that you don't matter in this equation. And that's what's responsible for this mass defections to the ruling party. It appears that as soon as you obtain membership of the ruling party, it's a guarantee of electoral victory in 2027. And that trend is problematic for democratic legitimacy.
And I've always found this quite interesting. The fact that these things happen, to defections, for example, and it looks like the people are in support of it, because they say sometimes silence means consent. Well, silence may also indicate a feeling of being powerless, overwhelmed and all of that. But largely you find people quiet. I've not seen, particularly those who move with the mandate of the people in that sense. You won't see protests, even if it's online, at least some sort of online protest, talk more of physical protest. So it would seem the people are somewhat in support of this. And we can talk about how this is probably our own brand of politics or democracy. But still speaking about this defections and the outcome or the eventual effect it will have on the outcome of elections, even the son of the leader of the coalition has moved to the ruling APC. That's the son of Mr. Atiku Abubakar. So for a lot of people, the election for 2027 is done and dusted. They already envisage which way it would swing. So I wonder, for you watching as well, do you think this is a reflection of what the people want based on their silence? So you think that the voices of the people are being muffled?
Well, I don't really think that citizens are silent. Let's wait for the elections. You would see a lot of protest votes in the elections. For instance, citizens, are just wondering how come that they voted a certain political party and they won, and majority of the votes went to that particular political party. And then one individual, driven by a plurality of factors. One, it could be induced. It could be, they could be coerced. We don't know what deals that they have. But all of these reasons, are self-serving, and they are selfish reasons. They are personal political reasons. And the question is, for all of these folks who've defected, did they consult with the people? So what you see is a mandate being substituted without due consultation with the people. And that's a backdoor way of sabotaging and undermining the sovereignty of the people, because sovereignty and legitimacy is derived from the people. You secure votes and go into office based on votes given to you by the people to your party, and then you switch without consulting the people. Was there a referendum? Was there a vote? So I don't think people are quiet. I just think that people are just watching in certain instances, And when you see people pledging support or saying that they endorse some of these defections, in actual fact, a lot of those are either as a product of financial inducement, but when people are making choices, because there are some defections that, quite frankly, in my personal estimation, they were just needless and unnecessary. There are cases where you've seen, governors that will not be on the ballot in 2027. There are cases where you see states that are traditionally strongholds of some of the political parties that really have no business, moving to the ruling party. You see them, just jump ship. Again, we're not privy to what are the factors driving that. But I think when it comes to the people, I don't think the people are quiet. We'll see what will happen in the next elections. It doesn't mean that there aren't people who, to a large extent, support, these defections. But we cannot say concretely that there's evidence to the effect that these people were consulted and they gave consent for their mandate, to be transferred to another political party. And let's not forget that I think morally it is wrong for you to vie and seek power on the platform of a political party and people trust, because in Nigeria we vote for political parties, and you defect, without going back to the people to seek their approval. Unfortunately, only elections provide that opportunity, and we will see, what happens. And I really want to reiterate as well that the legal framework needs to be reviewed in a way that it limits this sort of unnecessary defection that to a large extent is not informed by either implosion or the political parties. And maybe lastly to say that all of these just tells us that our political parties are weak. In places where they are existent, they've got institutional, structural, and leadership problems that needs fixing. So currently, the health state of our political parties in Nigeria is really at its lowest, very lowest ebb.
Well, and you could talk about, some of the items on the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, which was to limit the timeline of litigations. But there's so many litigations, within the political parties at this point. So much more to talk about, but we must anchor at this point. And thank you very much for coming on the program. We've been talking with Mr. Samson Itodo, Executive Director of Africa. Thank you for coming. We'll take a moment now. When we return, we'll continue with the next leg of our conversation. Stay with us.